Hello everyone, this is Aegon of Astora, and welcome back to Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore. This is episode 7. It is Wednesday the 29th of July today, and I hope that each and every one of you out there is having a fantastic day. You will notice that we find ourselves in Yahar'gul, the Unseen Village. I was actually kidnapped and taken here quite a while ago, perhaps a little bit less than a week ago when I was farming in between, I think, episodes 2 and 3. I was killed by one of the bagmen and taken here. And I've always found that cinematic that takes place right before you spawn here rather interesting, in that in the first part it seems to imply that you are being carried in the bag, because it seems to be from a first-person perspective, and you can see things, but you're seeing them through the fabric of something. So either the bagman, whose name I keep meaning to look up so that I can actually refer to them by their proper names, but I keep forgetting to do so I apologize for that. But yeah, we find ourselves in Yahar'gul, the Unseen Village, and while we're not going to spend a ton of time here, because of course we are going to return here, there are a couple things that we're going to need to do. And a couple of points that I wanted to make as well, because there is of course some very, very interesting lore going on here. Let's pick up some thick cold blood. And once again, we see a note that is distinct from the handwritten scrawls that we find elsewhere in the game, as we learned in the previous episode and in the episode prior to that. That this would seem to have been left by a Paleblood hunter. Madmen toil surreptitiously in rituals to beckon the moon, uncover their secrets. But I wonder, what purpose would a Paleblood hunter have to leave a note like this? And perhaps that's a point against the idea that Paleblood hunters would leave this, would have left messages like this, developer messages that use the messengers, because you could very simply just say that it was a message left by anyone who was in commune with the messengers.
Oh, merciful God, help me. In the name of the healing church, cleanse us of this horrible dream.
And so you've just seen the reason why we're wearing this hideously ugly armor set, which in part I'm trying to use different armor, I'm trying to use different weapons just to mix things up so that you guys, so that if you don't find the lore interesting, at least you're finding something interesting gameplay-wise here. And we find Sister Adela, who shares, she also has the holy shawl of the healing church, and appears to be wearing the female version of the Black Church garb.
By your garb, the healing church, you've come to save me. Thank you, dear saint. I have no words to express my relief. You can take this, at least. It's sure to please an upstanding member of the church like you. Oh, thank you so much, dear gods. Thank you so much. I was seized on the street by a hulking brute in the cathedral ward and locked up here. There were many others, but they've been taken away. And I've heard moans echoing in the distance ever since. So, the hunt is on tonight. Then the streets are perilous, and every door will be shut tight. Perhaps it isn't my place to ask, but do you know somewhere that might take me in? Oh, thank you so much. I'll set out as soon as I can. I pray for success on your hunt, kind hunter. set out as soon as I can. I pray, kind hunter.
So some very interesting stuff there. First thing that is worthy of note is the fact that I was wearing Gascoigne's gear, and as we learned previously, that Father was a title used for clerics in a foreign land, and there was no such rank in the Healing Church. So even though Gascoigne's... the very manner of referring to Gascoigne seems to run counter to the conventional wisdom of the church, or, you know, the current hierarchical structure of the same. And yet, I guess simply because of the Holy Shawl, Adela nonetheless recognizes us as a part of the church. This whole area, controlled as it is by the School of Mensis, is littered with clues that the School of Mensis hasn't seen eye to eye with the Healing Church. Oh, I forgot about you. Not that I really need what you have, but... as Redgrave argues in the Paleblood Hunt, the School of Mensis was meant as a replacement of sorts for Byrgenwerth in the aftermath of the schism that we discussed in previous episodes. Pretty gruesome stuff. I wanted to get another shot of that without the camera constantly fiddling, and I was doing some farming in this area, and this is something that I'm glad at least you don't have to deal with in terms of Quicksilver bullets and blood vials anymore. But when you're farming and killing a certain enemy that gives you pebbles, and then you get to max pebbles and you have to deal with the problem of disposing with a few so that you don't get those really annoying "your inventory is full" messages every time you pick one of them up. Actually, we're going to leave this area for a little bit. We are going to come back to there later. But yeah, even though the School of Mensis was meant as a replacement for Byrgenwerth, the school started diverging from the church itself, and so kind of creating a little mini schism after the larger schism. So in a way, you kind of see a divergence between the more scholastic aspects of these organizations and the more, political, power-hungry ones. And so, as I've mentioned, I have been here already, which is why the lamp is already lit. And we can see statue of a great one, of an amygdala or amygdala himself, or herself, however it is that we're meant to refer to them. And much like that which we found in the Grand Cathedral, it's just very grandiose, but also quite interesting, and not entirely, and a little bit opaque at the same time. We see one of the... this looks almost to be a child, or at least an adult of below average height, with a menses cage on their head, which we'll talk about a great deal later, but for now, note once again distinction between the developer notes and the developer handwritten scrawls. So this one was left by a character in the world who was not in contact or was not working with the messengers of the dream. Nightmarish rituals crave a newborn. Find one and silence its harrowing cry. So this would seem to have been left by a mortal being who is somehow in the know about what the School of Mensis is up to. And it's somewhat surprising that this would have been left here. And that no one in the School of Mensis is actively seeking them out. Oh, I forgot this. We see here what looks like baby great ones of the sort that we find in the Upper Cathedral Ward. Though they're not actually baby great ones, but... or at least that's my understanding of it. And... yeah, they're hunched over for some reason. I don't really understand. Perhaps they're praying? I'm gonna go with they look like they're praying. And there's two different sizes. This one's a little bit larger than this one. But yeah, very interesting. But they certainly look like the babies that you find, the squid babies, I guess, to look up what their name is as well, that you find in the Upper Cathedral Ward. You can actually see from up here down to the prison cells where we came from. And this body just looks like a normal civilian, not wearing any hunter clothes. Moon, a secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Bergenworth. A transcription of Moon, as spoken by the Great Ones inhabiting the Nightmare. Gain more blood echoes. The Great Ones that inhabit the Nightmare are sympathetic in spirit, and often answer when called upon. So, as you've been hearing, there is a song playing in the background here. But this one's different, because whereas in the Hunter's Dream or during a boss fight, the music seems to come from all directions, the song heard here in Yahar'gul seems to be more pronounced when we step outdoors than it is when we're inside the chapel. But let's talk a little bit about this note over here, which was left either by a Paleblood hunter or someone who's otherwise in commune with the messengers. Whatever the case, it reads, "Behold, a Paleblood sky." This note, and the subject of Paleblood more generally, is something that Hidetaka Miyazaki touched on in his interview with Future Press for the official guide, which reads in part, quote, "I think there are two different ways you could interpret Paleblood here. One is the color of the sky after you defeat the vacuous spider, and the Mensis secret rituals revealed. The sky there is a very pale blue, like a body drained of blood. There's also a message placed in Yahar'gul, Unseen Village, that calls back to that. This is before the rituals revealed, so when you're kidnapped and go to Yahar'gul, you don't know what it could mean yet. Then, after the ritual, you could look at it again, and it'll dawn on you." So, according to Miyazaki, this message was meant to encourage the player to juxtapose the two skyboxes. But the question remains, who, within the game world, would have left this note? If, as I've suggested, these notes can be left by anyone who is in commune with the messengers, a group which includes but is not limited to Paleblood hunters, then there are many, many possibilities. If I had to hazard a guess, I would say that it was left by someone closely associated with the School of Mensis. But that's just a guess based on little more than the exclamation points in the note, which suggests a certain excitement about something so seemingly awful. And so we can see here more pretty strong confirmation of Redgrave's theory about the coffins that are littered around Yharnam, that they are being driven by the School of Mensis, being picked up, placed in these carts, and we'll see even more evidence of this later on, but they're being picked up, placed in these carts, and being driven to Yahar'gul, the unseen village. How do we know that this isn't just some random person? Because it looks like from their corpse model that they're just wearing standard hunter's gear. But if we search the body, we find that this driver was wearing an iron helmet worn by hunters of the unseen village. The hunters of Yahar'gul answer to the village's founders, the School of Mensis. Hunters in name only, these kidnappers wear their black hoods low to shadow their eyes. This helm is made of metal, a rarity for hunter garb, and has high defense but only against physical attacks. So this one describes what they're wearing as a thick black pullover, the chest piece. Designed primarily to defend from physical attacks, the binding of thick rope serves both to protect its wearer and restrain his foes. So very interesting stuff, and not something I had ever really thought about in any detail before having seen Redgrave's video on the little things in Yharnam and the caskets. It's not something we've looked at yet, but let's have a look at the cold blood. A rich droplet of cold blood containing blood echoes, used to gain frenzied blood echoes. This manifestation of madness comes from a mind teetering on the very brink, but has a sane mind ever produced anything of true significance? So we see there once again this apparent inverse relationship between one's intelligence and one's sanity that is reflected in the mechanics of insight and frenzy, as well as beasthood. Throughout the game, the term beastly idiocy is used, in contrast to kind of brilliant evolved minds. So, very interesting. These people seem very much to be praying in this direction. Perhaps one, and they're all wearing church garb. So the holy shell hanging off the back. And I believe this is the direction that you go later on to eventually find the One Reborn. So perhaps they were here praying and died somehow for some reason. I don't really know. But all we find is madmen's knowledge on their corpses.
So this song we're hearing is not just to add some musical flair, some dramatic effect to the area. It's actually the School of Mensis actively trying to beckon a great one, and or a nightmare. And as you may have noticed, when we got closer to the spot where we'll later encounter the One Reborn, you may have noticed that the music actually seems to get louder, indicating that we were perhaps getting closer to where the ritual was actually taking place.
You can see up top is a lamp that is currently inaccessible to us. And something that we're going to try and tease out together later on is why the lamp that's there doesn't work anymore once we proceed later in the game. Why is it that that doesn't work? And if we're to accept that someone broke it purposely, the next question we have to ask is who and for what reason? So I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on that, because that's something that I've always wondered about. And perhaps it's just a gameplay thing, but interested to hear what each of you think nevertheless. So this ladder, or this elevator, of course, is currently not operable and leads to the upper area of Yahar'gul near the entrance. So you may notice in the upper right corner that we have a fair amount of insight. And that is because I'm trying to get it over the final breakpoint, which I believe is 50 or 60, because there is some very cool things that happen when you get to that point. So I would like to show those things off. And so to that end, I did a heck of a lot of jolly cooperation. Helped a fair number of people kill Gascoigne, Vicar Amelia, as well as the Cleric Beast. And so as a result, we're pretty good in terms of levels for now. We're at level 100 at this point. Just insanely over level for this part of the game. But it's allowing me to, show a bunch of stuff that I otherwise might have been more weary for gameplay reasons to try and do. Not wanting to just die over and over again while trying to make a certain lore point. And being over leveled allows me to do that, so. Well, that sucks. We were going to use that weapon to deal with Darkbeast Paarl. But in the meantime, we picked up the Tonitrus, a unique trick weapon contrived by Archibald, the famous eccentric of the Healing Church workshop. Striking this peculiar iron morning star flail like a match generates the same blue sparks that blanket a Darkbeast. Unfortunately, for reasons untold, the hunters of Archibald's time did not fully take to the device. So you're obviously not going to want to use that against Darkbeast Paarl.
And we are going to fast forward a little bit here, just because we spent a little bit too much time in Yahar'gul, especially considering the fact that we're going to be coming back here later on in the playthrough. And there are a number of things that we need to get done after we leave this place for this particular episode. So as I mentioned earlier, I was hoping to use the saw cleaver for this fight, but as you can see, there's actually a little icon that shows that it's broken, and that's not something I had ever seen, or broken or at risk. I'm not sure if you can actually break weapons in this game, and if you do, how you would go about repairing it, because of course there's no blacksmiths, but let's go say hello to Darkbeast Paarl, shall we? So that was a rather ugly boss fight, but as you should have seen in the upper right corner, we got our insight over 40. And that's significant for reasons that we will soon see. We have returned to the Oedon Chapel, and now that our insight is over 40, you might notice something different about the chapel's facade. We see here that there is an amygdala hanging off the side of the chapel, and we're going to be discussing this amygdala in particular a little bit later on. But for the time being, I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that with enough insight, you begin to see things that in our prior beastly idiocy, we weren't able to see. They were invisible to us. And that has some significant implications that we're not going to get into right this second, because we do have a fair bit of catching up to do inside of the chapel itself. But yeah, pretty weird. And it was about at this moment when I realized I've never actually tried to attack the amygdala. So I decided, what better time than now? And of course, as I'm sure most, if not all of you, were already aware, you can't actually do any damage to it.
Oh, the hunter. Alive and well at that. Another one you sent made it here safe and sound. This place is a haven now for so many. Thanks to you. I'm overjoyed, really, that you'd even give me the time of day. I don't suppose there's anybody out there worth saving anymore, but you did all you could. And so many owe you so much. Amazing, really. Not because you're a hunter, but because you're you. Makes me think, once dawn breaks, maybe I can just, start over. Makes it easier to bear all of this, you see. You've made life easier. Thank you.
So very interesting. Something I never noticed until now is that he kind of gives you a hint that you don't want to send the abhorrent beast who we find in the Forbidden Woods. You don't want to send them here. So he said specifically, I don't imagine that there's anyone out there worth saving anymore. Very subtle hint that if you find anyone else, they're not worth sending here.
If you please, kind hunter, when the night of the hunt passes, suppose we could be friends? Maybe? Now, I know I hardly deserve it, but, well, I had to just ask, Out of line. Yes, perhaps so. But, well, give it a thought. If you wouldn't mind, of course.
Don't be silly, of course we can be friends. I love the chapel dweller. Okay, let's say hello to Ariana.
Oh, hello, dear. You weren't lying. This is a safe place. Thank you. I'm in your debt. I'd like to tender my thanks, but I haven't much to offer. All I can give is my blood. But would you even take a whore's blood?
can see that Sister Adela is watching us, but we're going to receive the blood treatment anyway.
Oh, good. Come close, dear. Don't worry, this isn't the first time.
Blood of Ariana. Blood taken from Ariana, Cathedral Ward Woman of Pleasure. The sweet blood of Ariana restores HP and temporarily boosts stamina recovery. A member of the old healing church would know that her blood is similar indeed to precisely what was once forbidden. My prior musings and speculations about menstrual blood aside, this item description hints at the fact that there's something special, something unique about Ariana. The dress she's wearing is, of course, another important hint. But since we don't have the item description for that dress just yet, we're going to leave that for now. Before we speak to Adela, we're going to want to use Ariana's blood vial, because for her part, Adela seems to be well aware of the forbidden nature of Ariana's blood.
Oh, brave hunter, you're alive. Thank you very much. The town is in disarray, but there are still people here. Together we await the help of the healing church. I cannot begin to express my gratitude to you. The only thing that I can offer is my own lowly blood, if it would suffice. Yes, of course. Come in close. Now, take my blood.
Blood taken from Adela, nun of the healing church, restores an amount of HP, then continues to gradually restore HP for a short time. The healing church nuns are chosen for their merit as vessels for blood, and groomed as blood saints. The mere chance of being treated with their blood lends legitimacy to the healing church and communion. Very weird. Very, very weird. And I say that not because I'm creeped out by the potential that that might be menstrual blood. I don't care about that. It's just, I say that because I don't really know what to make of the fact that all these women are giving you their blood. It's just, yeah. I'm interested to hear if any of you have any theories about that. Of course, this guy's not giving us anything.
Ah, you. The swindling off-comer. Did you really think that'd work? There's no fooling me. Now, off with you. You heard me. Go away. I can't stand the stench of your lying breath.
So he's referring, of course, to the fact that we actually directed him to Yosefka's clinic. But as a skeptical, bigoted old man who thinks he knows everything, he goes wherever you tell him not to go.
I'll spare you one nugget of advice. Beware the Lady of the Night. I can see it in her eyes. She deeply resents the young saint. She hears people whisper. She knows what people think of her. Yes. She despises the saint for having what she doesn't. Bloody wench, they should have moved her on ages ago. I'll spare you one nugget of it, and then he's here acting like he owns the place. He's not to be trusted.
Sorry, I thought that he was repeating his dialogue there. Let's see if we can get him to say it again.
I'll spare you one nugget of advice. Beware the blind man. There the beggar sits at the bottom of the bloody food chain, and then he's here acting like he owns the place. He's not to be trusted. What's he want with all those people anyway? That little weasel has a murky past, I'm telling you.
This is a pretty good example of what some Marxist scholars refer to as false consciousness, which is described by Daniel Little, professor of philosophy at the University of Michigan Dearborn, in this way, quote, "False consciousness is a concept derived from Marxist theory of social class. The concept refers to the systematic misrepresentation of dominant social relations in the consciousness of subordinate classes. Members of a subordinate class, that is, workers, peasants, or serfs, suffer from false consciousness in that their mental representations of social relations around them systematically conceal or obscure the realities of subordination, exploitation, and domination those relations embody." End quote. So, as a result of this false consciousness, the bigoted old man misattributes responsibility for his sorry state of affairs onto the likes of the chapel dweller and Ariana, when in reality, as we've seen, the chapel dweller and Ariana seem to be well-meaning individuals who don't really mean harm to anyone. And in the process, the bigoted old man ignores the very institution that he should be blaming for everything that's happening. That is the Healing Church. So I somewhat doubt that that is kind of the point that Miyazaki was trying to get across with the bigoted old man, but that's the first thing that I thought of when I first got that dialogue from him. And I think it's really, really interesting, especially just given the context and the setting of the game. Now that we've defeated Darkbeast Paarl, we can take the rear entrance into Old Yharnam, and we're going to fast forward once again as we ascend to Jura's Perch, so that we might finally befriend him. As I said early on in this series, Jura is my favorite NPC in Bloodborne, and consistent with my earlier decision to not harm the beasts of Old Yharnam during our first visit here, we're going to befriend Jura by reiterating to him that we intend to spare the beasts. What's strange about this decision, though, is that the only way to get your hands on Jura's set is to kill him. And while I considered doing it for the item descriptions, I simply can't bring myself to do it. If you'd like to see what happens when you do, in fact, aggro Jura after having defeated Darkbeast Paarl, just click on this link and it will open in a new tab my cinematic lore video on Jura. And over there we see the NPC Hunter, referred to in the official guide simply as Jura's ally. He is wearing the Charred Hunter set, together with the black hood, because there is no hat piece for the Charred Hunter set. He's also wielding a saw spear and a hunter's pistol, indicating perhaps that he was once tasked with cleansing Old Yharnam, but also that at some point or another, he came to adopt Jura's philosophy about the beasts. Strangely enough, the beasts don't aggro onto him, even though he clearly walks around in their midst. But whatever the case, let's go say hello to Jura.
Well, well. How did you get in here? It's no matter. What brings you to Old Yharnam? I've no interest in matters further up, but you must not disturb this place. The beasts do not venture above, and mean no harm to anyone. If you still insist on hunting them, then I will hunt you first. You understand me? Yes, very good. I no longer dream, but I was once a hunter too. There's nothing more horrific than a hunt. In case you fail to realize, the things you hunt, they're not beasts. They're people. One day you will see. It's time you got going. But first, a farewell gift. I have no use for it anyway.
So adding to the evidence that Jorah was once a Paleblood hunter, he says specifically, I have no use for it anyway, in reference to his gifts. So the first being the Powder Keg Hunter Badge crafted by the Powder Kegs, the heretics of the workshop. The Powder Keg's adoration of complex design and big booms culminated in weapon designs that contrast with those traditionally of the workshop. The late Powder Kegs, bless their souls, had a motto: if a weapon ain't got kick, it just ain't worth it. And so, even though it doesn't say explicitly with this badge, it's essentially useless unless you are bound to the dream. Because we don't see, or again, unless you're in commune with the messengers, because we don't see any other use for this badge or any of the other badges outside of the Hunter's Dream. So we also picked up the Spark Hunter badge crafted in secret by Archibald, the infamous eccentric of the Healing Church, for his friends. Archibald was fascinated by the blue sparks that emanate from the hides of the dark beasts, and dedicated his life to its artificial reproduction, in a style of inquiry that, incidentally, followed closely the methodology of Byrgenwerth. So we can see there, once again, that the School of Mensis seemed very, very intent on trying to emulate the scholarly brilliance that took place at Byrgenwerth in the aftermath of the Schism.
What is it? Surely I need not repeat myself. Go, I say. You have the whole night to dream. Make the best of it.
Yeah, the second item that Jorah said he doesn't need anymore, Bold Hunter's Mark, which we talked about in past episodes, so I'm not going to go into it again. But that would seem to indicate that, Jorah is satisfied with how his investigation went, that, his reasons for etching the mark on this scroll have been satisfied, and he no longer needs to stare at it to study it. And, of course, that he's now mortal. It doesn't matter anymore. He can't use these to return to lamps. So, very interesting. Alright, so as in weeks past, we have a large number of comments to get to, and a number of very long but also very insightful comments to discuss. So we're not going to waste any time, but I will say just briefly that I'm not going to be recapitulating the comments in full, so I do encourage you to go back to the previous episode, that is episode 6, to check them out for yourselves. Dima Parachute writes that yet another realization struck him to do something I said about bloodletting. And he's been wondering for a while about the rather quote-unquote barbaric nature they have chosen for ascension, such as planting eyes on the inside and such. And then he realized that they may have been acting upon a lack of knowledge. And he goes on to say that in the context of Bloodborne, while adding the caveat that he's not familiar with H.P. Lovecraft at all, the actual horror aspect might come from the realization that humans are simply not ready for ascension or higher planes of existence, because no matter how they try to achieve it, they'll always, he says resort, but I think he means revert to their beast form and be cursed to repeat their own mistakes over and over again. And that he knows that Mr. Lovecraft was strongly suggesting helplessness as a fear factor, and to him personally, it would be more scary. And yeah, I agree very much with essentially everything that Dima Parachute says here, with the caveat of my own that I am also unfamiliar with Lovecraft and his works, and have only begun to learn about it and learn about Lovecraft and the types of stories, I guess Lovecraftian horror, that
the type of stories that Lovecraft wrote. And so I was very pleased with that in mind to see Jipawap 47's reply to Dima Parachute, which this is one comment I will read in full because it's brief, and I think it's really important that for myself and for anyone else out there who's not familiar with Lovecraft to kind of have this understanding in mind as we think about the lore going forward. So Jipawap 47 writes, quote, "Lovecraft's work is about looking behind the curtain of the waking world, or else finding something that slipped out from behind it. That we could easily see everything behind it if we were less ignorant is a blessing, in his opinion. For as dark and scary and hopeless as much of his stories are, they, as a whole, are a great trial and error learning of humanity's limits. For there is always that scrap of information that is saved from every fateful encounter. Eventually we are bound to find the correct path despite our blindness. The crawling chaos is a very short tale that might give insight, into his idea of ascension. A man in the past has an opium-fueled vision of the end of the world, and despite the name, it has nothing to do with... I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. Pancakes writes that he's... And this is on the subject that I raised in the previous episode about the significance or identity of the Keepers of the Old Lords, who we find in the Chalice Dungeons. So Pancakes writes that he's willing to guess that the Keepers are not much more than their name implies, that is, being immortal guardians of the Great Ones in the Old Labyrinth. He continues that they're the only enemies with a truly human form that respawn upon death, unlike hunter NPCs. So to that I would say... Because I have been spending a fair bit of time grinding in the Chalice Dungeons, and there are hunter NPCs, albeit in the root chalices, so I don't know how that really changes things. I've been spending a lot of time in the Chalice Dungeons trying to figure these things out for myself, but there are hunter NPCs in some of the root chalices that do, in fact, respawn. So I don't know if that changes what it is you're saying at all, but I just thought that I would point that out. But Pancakes goes on to say that his guess is there's nothing under the armor of the Keepers, but if we were to look before their cremation, when they were cremated, we would find the real form of a Pthumerian in his prime. There's no way that the emaciated grunt enemy type or those fatsos are the founders of such a great civilization, right? They're the remnants. So, very interesting that, the potential that the Keepers could be kind of the elite of the Pthumerian warriors who sacrifice themselves to protect the Great Ones forever, and thus, by extension, to keep another civilization from repeating the mistakes of the Pthumerians. Very, very interesting possibility, and one that I like a whole lot, and a very insightful comment. So thank you, Pancakes. And our next comment demonstrates even more powerfully that the comment section for the previous episode, chock full of insight. There's just great one wisdoms all over the place in the comment section. And so this comment is from Radioactive Soda, and as you can see, it's rather lengthy, but well worth the read. So again, please go check out episode number 6 and have a read through the entirety of the comment. But I'm just going to touch on a couple of points that are contained therein. So Radioactive Soda says that he or she has always been curious on the Keeper of the Old Lords, since there also seems to be a watchdog of the Old Lords, which could imply that these keepers are also kept that beast tamed. Maybe? And that we can also find various keepers throughout the other dungeons, so as a regular enemy, with their own sets of mobs wandering around them. He or she distinctly remembers finding a keeper with their own keeper's hunting dogs, so there has to be some connection between the dogs and the keepers. Something else I'd never considered, but yes, I believe most, if not all, of the keepers you find as regular enemies in the Chalice Dungeons do have those dogs around them. I probably should have done this before I started recording, but I will look in the official guide and see if there's any information on those dogs, because the dogs that accompany the keepers are exclusive, much like the keepers themselves, to the Chalice Dungeon, so there might be something there. Radioactive Soda goes on to say that these keepers and their watchdogs all hold some adeptness in fire, which also has a recurring theme in Bloodborne, and that is the using fire to cleanse beasts. So perhaps the keepers wanted to cleanse any sort of foreign being that tries to infiltrate their labyrinths. And again, very interesting and potential possibility there. Radioactive Soda goes on to say that he liked what Pancake said about the idea that the keepers you find are merely constructions of bone ash left behind and gained immortality through that form. And that if they were cremated, it would make sense that they would have such a strong connection with fire. They were burned to a crisp, purified into an immortal, willowy form in order to protect the greater good, the Great Ones. So to that I would say that yes, the Great Ones, I don't know if I would describe the Great Ones as the greater good, necessarily, but that's still something I'm thinking about. So I would agree very much with you and Pancakes, but I guess my spin on it, if you will, would be that perhaps they're trying to keep some other civilization from basically falling for the same trap that the Pthumerians did. So quite possibly. So the greater good could either be the Great Ones themselves, or it could be to keep the Great Ones from coming into connection with the waking world at all. And I'm really not doing this comment justice, so again, please go read it for yourself. But I am going to save the rest of it. I am going to return to this comment, especially on the subject of Amygdala and the defiled Chalice dungeon, because again, I'm currently grinding my way through that particular dungeon, and we'll be featuring parts of that in a future episode. So I do want to leave that discussion for that point in time. But thank you, Radioactive Soda, for a really... it must have been a lot of work that went into that comment, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with us. Brady the Hunter pointed out that in Greek mythology, there's a goddess named Chloris, or Flora, which can be taken to mean pale. So perhaps we can trace this back to the note later in the game discussing the moon presence and Paleblood. So that is certainly something we will do. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about Greek mythology, so my hope in bringing up this comment is that someone will see it who is, and can maybe chime in about the significance of Chloris and whether or not there may in fact be some influence or some connection there to the flora of the dream. So JippoApp47 had made another comment, this one where he says all of this has him wondering about how much of Western literature that the design team must have read, and goes on to list a series of really compelling examples of characters or things in the various FromSoft games that seem to have been directly inspired by various parts of Western literature. And this is something that I discussed in a previous episode when talking about, I believe it was in the context of our discussion of Runesmith Carol, and about Miyazaki, how when he was a child, his parents, they didn't have money for manga or comic books or anime or anything like that, so they would take him to the library, and he would just take out books that were well beyond his reading comprehension and well beyond his ability to even comprehend English. So I wouldn't be entirely surprised if all of these things were in fact references to those specific examples from Western literature that you've laid out, because he apparently did a fair bit of reading. He's fairly well read, it would seem, on Western literature. And that's something more generally that I've always found really interesting about FromSoft's games, and those directed by Miyazaki in particular, is that they're games made by an Eastern developer that is set in a Western setting, and that comments in various very interesting and provocative ways on the good and bad of Western culture. So that's something we'll be talking about a little bit more later on. But again, very interesting comment, and you guys really, the amount of insight I've gained metaphorically and literally during the course of this playthrough is just astronomical.
on the question of the identity of the bloodletting beast, Steven Swartz left a comment which could potentially throw a wrench in the idea that I presented in the previous episode, which during the commentary I failed to mention that I had in fact read about that theory from Redgrave's The Paleblood Hunt in the episode. In the commentary itself, I said that I wasn't sure if I had seen it anywhere, but in fact I had. So I just wanted to point that out, even though I did put an annotation on the screen during those parts. But Steven Swartz points out that there's another one deeper in the dungeons that is missing its head, and it's more likely to him that that's Lawrence. And so I just wanted to acknowledge this comment and put it out there. But again, we are going to be featuring more of the Chalice Dungeons in a future episode, so I'm just going to leave that for now. But before we leave that topic entirely, Jerks Sans Frontières replied to Steven, writing that on top of that, the headless version eventually reveals a gigantic parasitic worm that's living inside of it. So it's entirely possible that Lawrence's headless body became the worm's host after his death, explaining how he survived to be fought as a boss. And also pointed out something that I didn't know that's really interesting and curious, is that Lawrence is also credited as having 2 voice actors. And this is incredibly confusing, Jerks Sans Frontières writes, as he's only in one scene and his voice doesn't change. He suspects it's down to cut content rather than a clue that he's somewhere else in the game, as the 2 voice actors are only credited in the English dub, while the Spanish, French, and German ones only list 1 actor. Interesting. Very, very interesting. And finally, Pungent Kungtail writes that, is it just me, or does it look like the statue in the dream has a Frankenstein-esque scar through its forehead? And no, Pungent Kungtail, it's not just you, because a couple days prior to you having made your comment, Cock of the Walk made a similar observation, that the statue behind the Carol Rune workbench appears to have some stitches where it looks like her head had been cut open. If that were the case, it would raise some interesting questions. I did not notice that in the slightest, but as you're seeing right now, it seems very much like there's some stitches there. And yeah, it raises some very interesting questions, which, can relate back to the idea of, eyes on the inside, implanting eyes on the inside of our brain. And something else that I wanted to point out, which I didn't notice until after I had finished rendering and uploading the previous episode, is that this is actually the same statue that is all throughout the Underground Labyrinth, all throughout the Chalice Dungeons. You can see this statue. What does that mean? Not entirely sure, but I thought I would point that out. And again, maybe it's something that we'll talk about when we visit the Underground Labyrinth once again in some future episode. So yeah, a lot of really just incredibly insightful and interesting comments, and I very much appreciate each and every one of you who shared your thoughts, or even if you're just watching, because again, this has been a fantastic experience for me, and I hope that it has been for you as well. But that's going to do it for this episode. So thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.